So I tell you, prayer will be answered. All prayers are answered if you know how to pray. And prayer is not begging. You don't petition. You give thanks. Well, you aren't going to give thanks to something that isn't, but you must actually believe in God. As you're told, he who comes to God must first believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. But you must first believe that he exists. Read that in the 11th chapter, the 6th verse of Hebrews. All who would come to God must first believe that he exists. Well, I know he exists. I hope that everyone here knows he does exist. But as Blake said, why stand we here trembling around, calling on God for help, and not ourselves, in whom God dwells? So why turn on the outside to call upon a God when he dwells in me? Well, he dwells in me as my imagination. So I will commune with my own imagination until I am satisfied that it is done. And you get into the habit of feeling that it's done, the feeling of relief. And then you go about your business. And let it take its own course. It will take its course, and it will come out perfectly. So you don't beg anyone, you don't petition anyone, and it has nothing to do with so-called holiness. That is such an abused word. He is a holy man. May I tell you, if anyone introduces you to a person as a very holy man, turn and run. They'll fleece you. And I'm not fooling. They come over here from India, and you see them on the TV. Next thing you know, they're getting $500 for a special course. And people who have more money than brains, they pay all. Then off to India he goes with his multiple fortunes that he has simply taken from those who aren't given to thinking. So money doesn't care who owns it. So they have it, and so they'll give it out to anyone who is called a holy man. Well, I have had my experience with these so-called holy men. One little fellow, you all know him, you saw him on TV. And some reporter asked him, why do you advertise so much? You're always advertising, building up your own little personality. And Jesus never did. And in the little high-pitched voice of his, he started laughing. He said, that's why it took him so long. Well, I mean, after all, you sit down in your living room and you turn your little set on to listen to that nonsense. But people do it, and they paid him for it. Now here, may I tell you, you have everything that it takes to be the man, to be the woman that you want to be. Don't pass them up. You have it right here this very night. Know what you want to be. Be definite. When you know exactly what you want to be, don't ask anyone if it's possible. You simply feel that you are it. What would the feeling be like if it were true? Would my wife, my husband, my friends know it? Let them know it, not verbally. Let them know it all in your imagination. Let them see you as they would have to see you if it were true. Just let them see you. And go to sleep in that assumption. For I know from my own experience that an assumption, though denied by my senses and therefore called by the world false, if persisted in, will harden into facts. That I do know. An assumption, the same simple little assumption. If you will persist in it, it will harden into fact. That is a law. How else would you interpret this statement from the 11th chapter of the book of Mark? Whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and you will. How are you going to interpret that? Whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and you will. No limit is placed upon the power of belief. It doesn't even say it has to be good for you. It leaves you entirely free to make your choice and take the risk. Because when you reap that state, you're also going to reap the consequences of that state. So, take your choice, but also be willing to take the consequences of the state. And you could go through life just simply knowing there are only states. You see a person in the gutter today, he need not be in the gutter forever. Take him out of the gutter in your mind's eye. Here was a friend of mine, Freedom Barry, that I sent to San Francisco to teach this law. He hasn't had the experience of the promise, so he can't teach the promise. But he teaches the law. Before he opened, he saw a man crossing the street while he was airing his little dog. The man came over. First of all, he passed nice complimentary thoughts about the dog, which Freedom enjoyed. And then he said, could you let me have a little money? And Freedom said, I'm sorry, but I do not have any money. The man was very nice about it, a gentleman evidently, and he went his way, and Freedom, before he made one step, he remained right there on that sidewalk and saw that man gainfully employed. He said to Freedom he hadn't worked. He was out of work. And Freedom saw him gainfully employed and felt the thrill of his employment. A month later, Freedom is out walking the little dog, and this man crosses the street, comes over to Freedom, and he said, I don't suppose you remember me. And Freedom said, oh, yes, I do. Very well. He said, well, I want to thank you for not giving me money 1 month ago when I asked you. Had you given it to me, I'd be asking you for money today. But I got so mad with myself to be placed in that position to ask a total stranger for money, I went home determined I am going to get a job. He didn't know what Freedom had done, but Freedom did that, which pushed him out of that state of asking for money into a state of earning it. He went out the very next day after he met Freedom and got himself a job that paid well. He said, I'm on the job that I got the day after I asked you for money. I'm still on it, and there is room for growth in that job, and I'm sticking with the job. So again, thank you for not giving me the money. If Freedom had done what most people would do, would have walked away and said, no, I don't have any money for you, or I don't have money, without explaining why. But Freedom did something about it. He put the man in an entirely different state. And having put him in a different state, the man got a job the very next day. So I say to anyone, you can try it. Don't pass the buck and help everyone of this world. You create states to deliver individuals evermore. These are states that you create, and you can drop them. But the other states of which I spoke earlier, the spiritual states of the soul are forever, and no one's going to change them. But to make myself clear, when you are in the final state of the apostle, it doesn't mean you're better than you yourself when you're in that multitude of confusion. For God was playing that as he's playing the state of the apostle. But God is above all states, and you are God. So you're not an apostle forever. You play that, and that's the final part of the journey. And you come out redeemed when you hit that state. And you know that you are the apostle because you're sent. And the apostle is one who is sent. It's only then you know you've been chosen for a definite reason, and you're sent to tell what's going to happen to you. Well, then 30 years later, in my case, it happened to me that I could then speak with authority. I was not quoting anyone. I was not in any way speculating or theorizing. So when I tell you David is the Christ, I speak from authority, from experience, and therefore I speak with authority. When I tell you he is the only Son, which is a resultant state of the journey you made through those eternal spiritual states. And when you hit the last one, you are born. Listen to these words. In the King James Version and Moffat's Version and others that I have at home, it's correctly translated. The Revised Standard Version, the New English Version, have added a word that confuses the entire thing. This is now the 8th chapter, the 11th verse of Romans. If the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in us, he will also raise Christ. Two entirely different ones. But if you say also raise Jesus Christ, you're going to confuse the entire thing. So that the King James Version leaves off the word Jesus when it comes to the second raising, which is Christ. And it happens just like that. Jesus comes first. It's the I am of man. That's the Father. He is awakened first. 5 months later, then comes David. 139 days after, the Father awakens within the sepulchre. Then comes an explosion, 139 days later, and then David stands before you. He is the resultant state. Now, when you read the Bible in the future, and I hope you all will, always bear in mind the characters mentioned there and depicted there are not individuals as you and I are. They are states of consciousness. From Adam to the very end. These are all states of consciousness. So, the names signify the state, if you know the meaning of the name. But do not think when you use the word Abraham, you're speaking of a man. But I speak of Bill. Bill is a man. He's an individual. It says God wearing that mask called Bill. But when I speak of Abraham, that's a state of consciousness. But when you meet these states of consciousness in vision, they are personified. And you see a man, but it is not man as you are man. All these are contained within the human imagination. So when you encounter Abraham, well, you're going to see a man. And you know he's Abraham. When you encounter David, you meet a youth, an eternal youth. But it's a resultant state. You are above all states. You are God. Every being in this world is God, and God is one. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And never get away from that. That is fundamental. The minute you have two gods, you're going to get confusion. 2 will become 4, and 4, 8, and 8, 16, and you get confusion in the world. Only one God. And that God, his name forever and forever, is I am. That's the being. So when you awaken within the sepulchre, you know who awoke. You say, I am. There's no one present, just yourself. And you come out without the help of anyone. And then comes the imagery of Scripture that surrounds you, bearing witness to the truth of the story. But you are cast from then on in the central road. And so everything unfolds within the imagination of man. And that is God. So tonight, as you leave here, go out knowing you have the power and the right to become the man, to become the woman that you want to be, without hurting any person in this world. You don't need to hurt anyone to gain anything in this world. You go out and play your part fully. And let no one pull any rank, for all ranks are only states of consciousness. The king and the one who is amusing him, the court jester, are both played by the same being, and that being is unseen by the two masks, the mask of the king and the mask of the court jester. For behind the mask is God, and God is simply I am. So one plays the part of the court jester, and one plays the part of the king, and we honor the mask and bow before the king. And that court jester may be nearer to apostleship. Do not judge from appearances, as you're told. When they saw this giant of a man stand before him, Samuel thought, well, certainly he is the Lord's chosen. For the Lord said to Samuel, go down to the house of Jesse, for I have chosen one of his sons to be king of Israel. And when the first son came in, he was a majestic creature. And Samuel said to himself, surely he is the Lord's choice. And the Lord said, I have rejected him. The Lord sees not what man sees. Man sees the outward appearance, but the Lord sees the heart. Then he brought the second, and he brought the third. And finally he brought the last, which was David. And David was tending the flocks. Now this is all a story, but you must extract the meaning from that story. So he brings the little one in. He was just a youth. And as he came in, no one thought for one moment he would be the one. And the voice spoke to the prophet Samuel. Rise and anoint him. This is he. And in the midst of his brothers, Samuel anointed him with the holy oil. And then the Spirit of God came upon him mightily. from that day forward. Never left it. Therefore, he never lost a battle. The victorious one, called David. So in the end, he stands before you, for he played all the battles. You were the Lord of Lords within, but you didn't know it. And he is the Father's only Son. And then he stands before you, and he is your Son. And then only do you know you are God the Father. You gain all the assurance that you need when you see David. For he is God's Son, and he is your Son. Therefore you must be God. And that's the story. Now, this being our last night, suppose we go into the silence and give you ample time for questions if you have any. Good. Harry, I didn't see this, and I could have used it an hour ago. I didn't see it. I would have. And regretted it too. Now, are there any questions, please?
When you talk about another body, when they take with them their memory, do they remember all their family and all the things they've been doing?
Yes, my dear. You carry with you your memory. even though the body is now, well, those that I've seen, and I've seen so many, including my parents, the day that my mother died back in 1941. It was just about a month before Pearl Harbor. I was in New York City then. I just returned from Barbados, where I spent 3 weeks with her. And it was a terminal case of cancer. So I came back. I was sitting in my living room. The mother comes before me. And she was a girl, beautiful blonde, as she was, as a young woman, blonde, blue eyes. And mother is before me, sitting under an arbor. She was passionately fond of flowers and a beautiful garden. She's under this arbor, brushing her hair. But she wouldn't talk to me. And then I sat and I wrote my sister a letter saying, I've just seen mother. And mother is a most beautiful young woman of 20 years of age. And I took that to mean that she had recovered. But that was the very moment that my mother departed the world. But when I got my sister's letter that came back to tell me, that was the hour, allowing the difference in time between New York and Barbados. And that was exactly when mother closed her eye, and that was it. But she instantly appeared to me in New York City, 2,000 miles away, not as the old person. She was only 61 when she died, but she looked much older because she was in such pain for the longest while. Mother must have looked, well, you can't name it. It was so old, and she lost so much weight. She was a little tiny, shrunken thing when mother was not given that way. But I saw her at 20. My brother Lawrence, who died at 62 or 63, he was going on 63. When I saw Lawrence, he was about 21, 22. My father, same thing. Jack Butler, who was my secretary, when he dropped dead at the age of 50. When I met him 8 months later, Jack was about 21, 22. So I can only tell you what I see. They all are restored. They aren't little babies. They're restored with intelligence, and they know who they are. They know who you are. And many of them don't even know that they died. Totally unaware of it. The majority don't know it, because they haven't died. Like Jack, when I said, well, Jack, you died. I went to your funeral. So you're crazy. I die, but I'm not dead. I said, yes, you die, but you're not dead. Well, that doesn't make sense, does it? Well, there are states of consciousness in which visionary men are accounted madmen. And so I've been accused of being mad, being insane, but I can't help it. I see these things and I tell you exactly what happened to me. But there are certain states in which all visionary men are accounted madmen. On 49th Street in New York City one day, I was opposite a window that had a nice display of my books, and a big picture of me. And three came by. One was the guide showing the other two friends of hers who came out of town and wanted to see the sights of New York City. And so I came up and stood next to them. They didn't know me and didn't look at me, but they're looking at the picture. And one woman said to the other two, "You see that fellow?" Naturally, they're all looking at it. Said, "He's as mad as a hatter. But you should go and hear him. It's part of the thing to do when you come to New York City. Go and hear him. He's just as mad as they come." They call him the mad mystic of 48th Street. Well, she heard that. No one called me the mad mystic, but she must have heard it to tell these two. I'm called the mad mystic of 48th Street.
Welcome to How to Manifest Anything YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe.